went on their mission trip to work with Habitat for Humanity. We went to Appleton, Wisconsin. Appleton, Wisconsin happens to be about 30 miles or so, give or take a few, away from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Green Bay is known for what? Yeah, everybody last night said cheese, okay, which is true. The cheese is definitely a popular one, but the one I'm looking for, the Packers. That's right, the Green Bay Packers. And on one of our evenings there, we had the opportunity to travel to see the wonderful football stadium that the Green Bay Packers play at, okay? For those of you who don't know anything about football or Green Bay Packers, that's one of the teams of the National Football League. Of course, a big rival of our Detroit Lions. Unfortunately, our Lions did not fare too well against them on Thanksgiving Day, but that's for another time, okay? But we went up to Lambeau Field. Lambeau Field. That is where the Green Bay Packers play. And, I've been to lots of football stadiums, college and pro, and they're always a great experience to go there. But one of the things I didn't realize is that Lambeau Field is more than just a stadium. I mean, in itself, it is a museum. In itself, it is a destination. You know, when Curly Lambeau, who the field is named after, the stadium's named after, decided to, bring a pro football team, he convinced the boss of the company, the packing company that he worked for, to fund a football team, to bring them to Green Bay. He decided that, we were going to build a stadium that wasn't just going to be a place that this team played football at, but that people would come and visit all year round. And that they do. I didn't realize that 2 million people come and visit Lambeau Field and tour Lambeau Field each year. 2 million people, that's just amazing. I mean, the Big House, of course, which is the next best cathedral in Michigan, in my eyes, okay? I don't think it gets 2 million visitors a year, but it's a wonderful place to go, Definitely worth a trip to Ann Arbor, okay? But, Lambeau Field has become this place where people come and then experience so much more. But of course, as you go through the stadium and you hear the history of it, and you walk through the different rooms and so forth, and you end up on the field. And by the way, if you get to the field, don't even try to touch the grass because security will haul you out. I mean, you can look at it and that's it. You can look at it and that's it. And don't ever bring up the suggestion to the tour guide that, this being Green Bay, it's cold during the winter. Why don't you ever build a roof over it? I started to say that. He cut me off right there. He says, never. That will never happen in Green Bay. So they must like playing in their cold because that's what they're all about. Okay? But in all this touring, one of the things that kind of stood out in my mind, of course, is on the outside, as you enter into the stadium is a statue of a man, okay, and considered to be the greatest coach of the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, okay? For any of you that know anything about football or don't know anything about football, the championship Super Bowl trophy is named after Vince Lombardi, the Lombardi Trophy, all right? And he was a great man. He was a great coach, but things people, don't realize about Vince Lombardi is the type of coach that he was. He only coached the Green Bay Packers for 8 years. During those 8 years, he won 5 championships, the very first 2 Super Bowls. Once they merged the, American League and the National League together in the football, he won the first 2, but he also won 3 other championships. But he only coached there for 8 years, and he was in administration for 1 year, and then he went and coached Washington Redskins for 1 year, but the Packers don't like to talk about that. People in Green Bay don't mention that too often, But in some sense, he was sort of a god, and still is, to the people of Green Bay. One of the other unique things about Green Bay, and Vince Lombardi helped to put them on the map, is that normally a city that has a professional team, has a population or, a number of people that at least 1 million or more, okay? Green Bay, Wisconsin has a population of 132,000 people, which is kind of amazing that they have a professional team. But let me tell you, those 132,000 people are nuts about their Packers. and they have a passion for it. But Vince Lombardi, during his time as a coach, he challenged his players. He challenged his teams to always be the best that they could be. Now, if you talk to a lot of his players, they'll tell you that, he was a mean old cuss as a coach. And he would yell at you, and he would push you, and just to push you to become the best that you could be. Vince Lombardi is one of the most quoted football coaches, or even coaches, period, in all of sports. Because he knew how to motivate people. Of course, some of his favorite sayings, of course, is, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. One of my favorites is, he says, falling down isn't that bad. He says, the success comes from rising up. The success comes from rising up. But I always try to, reflect upon, what made Vince Lombardi so great? How did he motivate these players? Because, these players will tell you that he did more than just make them better football players. He made them better men. He made them better human beings. And that is what he did. He pushed them to be the best that they could be. One of the players, spoke about Vince Lombardi. They said, during practice, the practices were hard. Some of the hardest practices that we ever went through, and the games were easy, because he beat us up so much, during the practice. When it got time for the game time, it was easy. But one of the players once said of him, he says, the thing that sticks out the most about my time with Vince Lombardi is that he brought love into the locker room. He brought love to our team. And that's kind of unheard of with a professional football team, a man's game, where they're going to hit each other and battle each other and beat each other up. But for Vince Lombardi, it was the love of one another that bonded that team together. Like I said, he could be as mean as can be to you on the football field, but then he would show you the love that helped you to overcome whatever it was that you failed at that day or stumbled at on that day. He brought love to the team. One of the other things about Vince Lombardi that people don't know about, so he was coach from 1959, to 1967. A very challenging time in America. A very challenging time amongst the races, right? Well, Vince Lombardi, was one of the first football coaches to ever bring, a mixed culture, of races onto his team. And people used to ask, like the black players, they said, well, how does he treat you? Does he treat you any different? He says, he doesn't treat anybody any different. He treats us all like dogs, He treats us all like dogs. Once, somebody said to Vince, he says, your black players, your white players, how do you handle this? He says, it doesn't matter. He says, I don't have black players or white players. He says, I have Packer green players. That's it. That's it. He was one of the first coaches also to acknowledge, homosexuals and players. And he told his coaches, you will not treat anybody different. You will treat everybody the same. And if I see you treating anybody different because of their sexuality, you're fired. You're fired. What's interesting about all this is I think and say to myself, what motivated Vince Lombardi? What formed him? What shaped him? Yes, he was a mean, tough coach, but then he brought this love and acceptance and tolerance, into a time when it really wasn't supposed to be. But what motivated, what formed him, what shaped him? He was an incredibly devout Christian, an incredibly devout Catholic. His daughter spoke of him after his death that he was the only man that she knew that went to church 365 days a year. It was his faith that formed him, that motivated him, that led him, that helped him to make decisions, that helped him how to relate to each person that he came in contact with. His Catholic faith was at the core of who he was. He wasn't without his challenges. Let me tell you, if you read anything about his family life or, anything to do with his marriage. I mean, he had his challenges. He did. But it was his faith that helped him to get through all of that. Vince Lombardi, said that the three most important things in life were faith, family, and football. His wife said she thinks it was the other way around, it was football, family, faith or something, but it wasn't in that order for her. But faith was always number one for him. It shaped him, it formed him. And going to Mass every day, there was a young priest in Green Bay, the church that he would attend each morning, and that it was a new priest there at the church and a young priest. And when he went to say Mass for the first time or preside at Mass for the first time, there he saw Vince Lombardi in the front row, and he was so nervous because he was afraid of him. He was afraid that he might correct him or say something to him if he did something wrong. But Vince Lombardi was who he was because of his faith. Now, why do I bring up Vince Lombardi on today, the fourth Sunday of Advent, as we, hear the Annunciation story of Mary? Well, I started to reflect upon, something in this reading, that has always had an impact for me. And it was really, Mary's last line, her response to the angel Gabriel. She wasn't without her fears. She wasn't without her questions. She was nervous. If you read the story, if you listen to the story, she wasn't too sure about what was happening. She didn't know how it was going to happen. The angel tried to explain it to her, and in the end, what does she say? She says, "Let it be done. Let it be done according to your word." That's it. I'm just going to put it in your hands. My brothers and sisters, her faith shaped her. Her faith formed her. Her faith gave her the trust to accept whatever came her way. I mean, that should speak to us and that should embrace us. That is how we should look at life. We should be challenged today and say, where is our faith? Are we letting our faith form us? Are we letting our faith, shape us? We sit here each week. Are you just kind of checking the box today and just saying, okay, I got my Sunday obligation in today and, come to church tonight for, the Christmas obligation or tomorrow? Or are you really letting it form you? Helping you to make decisions, choices. Helping you to relate to the people in your life in a better way. Are you letting your faith shape you and form you so that you're a better human being? Because I think in the end, that's what God wants of us, to be a better human being. Now, letting it form you and shape you and doing the right things, I don't know if you're ever going to get a statue out front of here with your image in it, Who knows? Maybe, Vic. We might have one out there one day, Vic George, But that isn't what we should strive for that statue. What we should strive for, of course, in the end, that God just looks at us and God is there with us in those very last moments. And he looks at us and says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Today I hope that we are able to respond as Mary and just say, Lord, just let it be done according to your word. Let it be done according to your word.